Hi, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on using conflict to fuel transformation. Today, we're going to discuss different ways we can use conflict to fuel transformation in life and business and share stories about the impact this can have and help you apply some key principles within your life, your teams, and companies. And you can always follow Blackwolf Consultants events, education, and content with the hashtag Blackwolf. Now more than ever, leaders must clearly recognize the areas where they can use conflict to fuel transformation. Transformational communication is one of our belief systems that we focus on in our CTLA program. There are many ways to have transformational conversations. One of the ways we will explore this today is with authentic, caring communication. In our webinar today, we are going to explore concepts and also give you practical steps and advice to help you apply the principles you learn in your own teams and companies. So thank you for being here. Before we get going, I'd like to introduce myself and Robert. Robert Krenza is founder and CEO of Blackwolf Consultants and really a thought leader in this space. I think the idea of shifting the paradigm around what conflict can be from a black and white conversation to a source of seeing color in full spectrum and all the possibilities at hand is something he's really expert in, and I'm excited to be facilitating the conversation. And for those that don't know me or we haven't met before, my name is Gabriel Krenza. I'm a senior consultant at Blackwolf. I've been working in the space of experiential education for over a decade now, and as you may have picked up from my name, I've worked with Robert for a long time, and it actually feels like I've known him for a lifetime. So it's again great to be here. Let's just dive right in. As Robert mentioned, we're going to take questions in the middle and at the end of the session. Please use the Q&A feature in your Zoom window. It's at the bottom to ask questions, and we'll take a break in the middle of our conversation to address as many, and then at the end if we have time. So Robert, transformation. It's a big word. After just a quick Google search, I got 92 million hits on when I typed in beliefs in transformation. Obviously, there's a lot of different points of view floating around. And for the purpose of our conversation, how do you define the word transformation?
I think simply, Gabriel, thank you for the introduction, by the way. And I'm happy to be on this call with you as well. I think the bottom line, transformation is a belief system. Our beliefs drive our behaviors. One of the things that organization development consulting is focusing on is the behaviors. I mean, we can observe, we can see the behaviors, we can't see beliefs. That's why transformation is so critical, and is particularly critical at this point in time, is to really examine our belief systems, examine our beliefs, which will really lead us to really understanding, are these the beliefs that we want to have? And if they're not, then what are the beliefs that we do want to have? And I would say that what accompanies beliefs are empowering beliefs and disempowering beliefs. And so what I'm operating from is are your beliefs empowering you and others, or are your beliefs disempowering you and others? And when we focus on that conversation, and that conversation becomes an internal conversation. So rather than relying on a coach to ask you the question, CTLA, and we'll kind of be happy to go into that deeper at another time. But the CTLA program, Collaborative and Transformational Leadership Acceleration, that program is really focused on understanding from a personal perspective, then an interpersonal, then a team and organization perspective, how our beliefs impacting our effectiveness in the organization.
Thank you. A quick follow-up on the transformation piece. What's your opinion? What's your thought on our ability to transform as we become adults? I think we often see or think of once you kind of graduate college or some other big life event that you become an adult, that you're fully cooked. What's your thoughts on transformation throughout life?
That's a great question, and certainly one that's very specific and personal to our relationship and to family relationships, or relationship between parents and children. So, I mean, my perspective is as strong a perspective in the parental or familial domain as it is in the leader or the corporate domain. I don't think it changes at all. So the beliefs as a parent that we have towards our children, what is our belief? And is our belief empowering us and the children, or is the belief disempowering us and the children? I think that this is a good point. This is a good point in time to really emphasize that we all make mistakes and that perfect is an illusion. And so it's not about doing it perfectly. It's about being in a inner dialogue with yourself as opposed to a right-wrong dialogue. And I'm sure we'll get into that more. And I think the same thing is true. I think the same thing is true of leadership. I think that leadership fundamentally is about inspiring and motivating, and you can't inspire and motivate people if I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah, thank you. So what I think I hear you saying is that transformation and the opportunity to transform our beliefs and subsequent mindset can take place at any point during our life. And it's really about just boosting our awareness around, around choosing to kind of explore what transformation looks like. Let's shift to the idea of conflict. I want to make sure that we have definitions of these words that we're using in this webinar. And so with that said, how do you, what do you define as the basis of conflict?
I think it's pretty simple, and it is in many, many models. It's the second of the 5 steps in a high-performing team. So I simply define conflict as I'm right and you're wrong. So conflict that is not constructive. So I think that conflict can be constructive when I'm holding a strong point of view and I am in a dialogue with you, understanding that you have a strong point of view. So we can have a strong point of view. It crosses the line into a breakdown when I believe that I'm right and my idea is better than your idea, and you're wrong. And my experience is that when I'm in conflict with someone, they believe exactly the same thing. They believe they're right, that I'm wrong, and that's where the conflict really begins.
Yeah, that's great. I think a thought I would add, maybe we bookmark it for later in the conversation, is I see the same definition applying to conflict within yourself, whether your ego's telling your heart or mind it's wrong, or vice versa, that it's really about one governing opinion telling the other governing opinion that they're wrong, just like it would be in any relationship. Last definition I'm going to ask of you, and one that we really hold dear at Blackwolf. How do you define authentic, caring communication?
Leadership and Self-Deception, which was written by the Arbinger Institute, is a very deceptively simple book. It's one of those books that is a story, tells a story. And the way I would answer your question is what that story is telling is that when we objectify human beings, that's when the collapse begins. That's when I see you as a thing versus a person who has thoughts and feelings and beliefs that when I stop seeing that and I just kind of treat you like a thing or think of you as a thing, that's where the breakdown begins.
That's helpful. So again, just so that the audience gets a clear understanding of where we're coming from, in a sentence, how would you define this idea of authentic, caring communication?
I know we'll get into this in a bit. I think it's heart-based. I think that authenticity really kind of comes from the heart. And if you and you know when you're being authentic and when you're not, and you know when you're being caring and when you're not. So being authentic and caring is really a heart-centered communication that the intellect is informing, but here comes a word that we need to explore at some point, is it's not controlling.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the point that you made earlier about all of this is as relevant to you as the individual as it is to you in your relationship with others. So it starts with your relationship with yourself. So authentic and caring is your relationship with yourself. So being authentic and caring towards yourself is where authentic communication to others starts.
Perfect. I think that was a little more than a sentence, but needed some more follow-up to really provide to provide more context. Great. So we have the definitions out of the way, and now we can use those words. Robert, how important is silence when we find ourselves in conflict with others or ourselves?
So I'll just say to the audience, this is a conversation that has existed within me for close to 50 years. My understanding of silence within ourselves, or the value or impact that self-reflection, and the word that is most specific in my mind is meditation, is really focusing on your breath and not on your mind, and really allowing or observing your mind that has this endless loop of chatter. And it allows us to see from a still place, is my chatter empowering me or is it disempowering me? And that's where the importance of creating a internal dialogue that is self-empowering is directly related to creating a dialogue with others that empower others. So words like contribution and acknowledgement and gratitude are all critically important words that really reflect emotion that we need to share with ourselves and we need to share with others. I lost you.
Here we are.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you. So just to remind the audience, if anything that Robert or myself are sharing and that stirs a question that sparks a thought for you, just please throw them in the question and answer box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get into them a little later on.
Hey, Bo, if you would for a second just open up Q&A, because I'm not seeing anybody asking questions in the Q&A space.
Right, and that's why I shared with folks. So we don't have any questions yet.
Okay, got it.
Yep. but we will. So that's great. I mean, the silence piece is obviously a lot easier said and done, and requires kind of a great degree of emotional maturity. One of the ways we practice that is through meditation, that I'm sure you'll explore deeper. What other tips, can you share some other tips on how to maneuver yourself when you're in the middle of a major conflict with another or with yourself?
So there's two parts to this question, and one directly connects to the meditation part. So if I am not able to observe myself and really create a steady state within myself, it's going to be impossible to actually have a when I'm in conflict with someone, which is really the kind of the root of this question. When I'm in conflict with someone, I cannot not be affected by their state if I'm not choosing my state. And so choosing a state of consciousness that really reflects that I have a strong point of view, but I'd like to be in a dialogue. So now I'm moving into what's the conversation look like. So I have a strong point of view about how to approach this problem or what the solution to this problem might be. And I can hear that you have a strong point of view, but I hear that you're coming from, you think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I hear you coming from, you're right and I'm wrong. And what I suggest is, let's talk about what is the problem and what's the problem that we're solving and for whom are we solving this problem. And so from a corporate perspective, we're solving the problem, for the organization or for the team, and so reminding, being able to be in that steady state, and then communicating that state, and then inviting the other person into, I know you have a strong point of view. I think it would be valuable for us to move out of being right and the other person being wrong, so that we together can work together to really identify what the solution to this problem is. That's where collaboration begins.
Yeah, great. And a great explanation, a great segue. I think some of the folks that have joined are certainly keen on how, conflict can be used as a tool or a source of innovation. So talk to me a little bit about how leaders can use conflict to generate great results within their team. And not have it feel contrived.
Yeah. So my pause, Gabriel, is coming from, like choosing an answer versus, the question that you ask really kind of floods me with different thoughts. So if I can just be clear that your question is, when a state of conflict exists between two people, what's the conversation that you might have to really kind of move out of conflict? Is that correct?
Yes. Well, two parts. It's that, and it's how leaders in business can use conflict as an opportunity to achieve great results.
So it goes from lots of thoughts to the way to move out of conflict is to see it. So first you have to recognize that we're not going anywhere, in this conversation. And how do you go somewheres? So authentic and caring communication is how you move out of positional. So I'm going to use that word. Positional communication is the conversation called I'm right and you're wrong. Authentic and caring communication is when I'm in a dialogue with the other person about your ideas and your thoughts. So share with me what your ideas are. And so I think it's inviting the other person into having a conversation with you and then holding the space to really have a conversation versus a right, wrong, like I'm right, you're wrong. This is my point of view. What's your point of view? So I think that's really where I've seen tremendous movement and literally heard from teams. So there's not one team that we've worked this with that hasn't said that communication is, after the shift in their belief system, that what they see is the greatest impact that a shift in their belief system is having is on their communication, how they're communicating. And we're hearing that it's how I'm communicating with my colleagues at work and how I'm communicating with my partner and my children at home. So this is not just a business conversation.
Yeah, great answer. In my experience, if I think about, how do we honor conflict, name it, and kind of move through kind of the why is this happening? Why, what's going on that has led us to this conflict, and more to the like, so what? So I think of some of the greatest explorer adventures in history, and namely the expeditions that have gone wrong. So we're now operating in a
plan.
Right, not according to plan, but now we're operating under a new reality, new set of circumstances. How do we shift, or where's the opportunity in this? And I think there's probably an entire webinar's worth of content, if not weeks, months, years of discussion around globally, now that we're on kind of the global expedition of humanity. With the pandemic at hand, our expedition objectives have changed, and it's a real conflict. I mean, we feel a level of discomfort in this new reality of sorts. What's the new operating system? What's the opportunity? So, a tangential side thought for another time. I do want to ask a couple questions from the audience, Robert.
Sure.
Some great ones here, but just one that's pertinent for what we've been talking about now. What are some indicators, if you will, maybe a KPI, key performance indicator, or non-performance indicator? So the question is, what are some indicators that a conflict is healthy and productive versus toxic or pointless? And how do we choose when to engage and when to walk away from that situation?
That's a juicy question. Our perspective is that it starts with the individual, then it goes into the relationship with other, then it's into the relationship called team. So my first response to this question is, creating a steady state within yourself. It requires a rigorous self-examination and self-inventory. And the value of that to the questioner is that it creates a steady state within us, so that rather than being at the effect of, and there's lots of emotional intelligence data that the mind state really pulls towards it a vibration that will mirror that mind state. So you really have to be grounded in your mind state of empowerment in order to deal with a and this gets very subtle. That I want to hesitate calling conflict bad, and rather call conflict an opportunity. And the opportunity is contribution. That's the contribution. We're here identifying how to deal with this problem, and the result is contributing to the organization, to the team. So being in that state of awareness that the intent here is to contribute to the team, it really creates a opportunity for that's your point of view, and it calls the person who is in a right-wrong model into the conversation, because to the point is there is no contribution from a right-wrong state when the goal is to collaborate. So the question is, how do you know when to walk away from a tense situation? When I think the way that you walk away is crucially important, and so communicating when you're going to really get together again, and what it is that we both should reflect on. What's the goal? What's the goal of what it is that we're intending to solve? What's the problem that we're intending to solve? And let's reflect on that and come back in tomorrow, or whatever the time crucial amount is, what's crucial amount of time. But sometimes it's a day, sometimes it's a week, sometimes.
I have a question, and I'm happy to offer a kind of my insight on it. Maybe you chime in as well. Krista asks, what is the best trick for you to slip into heart-centered space when you are activated by the negative self? The I am right, you are wrong talk, or when you're feeling out of alignment, and when the mind won't let you meditate. I think it's a great question. I also think it brings up the thought to me, how do you define meditation, and what are meditation practices? For me, really the best tool I've found is getting outside, and being kind of physical in my body, whether that's just going for a walk in nature quietly, or doing something that really pushes my body to an aerobic level, where my heartbeat's able to tell my mind to shut up for a little while. But the way in which you can reconnect with your body when the mind is just going wild in all different directions is one way. But what's a trick you found just when the mind won't let you sit still and meditate, Robert?
I can't think of one word that's better than love. Love yourself. I also think of a quote that I read or was given from Napoleon Hill a long time ago. And it's, I am the dominating thoughts that I allow to occupy my mind. And so if I am consciously aware enough to choose, I love myself and I love others. The mind, it's like a mantra or a way to repeat our thinking about ourselves. And to really shift that inner state requires a shift in our consciousness. And so I love myself and I love others. And I have found that repeating that really is an antidote to stilling the mind. I think you're silent again, son.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well,
Thank you, Krista, for the question.
yeah, and we'll address. Well, let's do one more. I think people are really looking for some practical tools in this space because conflict is inevitable. But another question asked is, how can I use transparency and vulnerability when in conflict with our bosses or superiors and in the midst of fear that I could lose my job?
There is no easy answer to this one.
Mm-hmm.
The answer is in the question. That responding with transparency and vulnerability does not include from fear. So you can't be transparent and vulnerable and in fear at the same time. The two can't coexist. So what I would say to this person is that the fear is the first work that one needs to do. And there's never been a better definition that courage is taking action in the face of fear. So I don't know that it's in the face of fear, but it's really understanding that fear exists, and I am. So if you have a point of view and you share that point of view, talk about transparent and vulnerable, the result will be empowerment.
Yeah,
I think it's this. I don't think it's easy. I do think it's simple. So first you deal with your fear, and you deal with your fear from a place of self-empowerment, and then you share, authentically and vulnerably with your boss or your superior.
Great. Thank you for that. Let's get back into our conversation a little bit deeper. Now that we've defined some of these leadership approaches and been discussing them, kind of approaching different answers to a multitude of questions around this topic, I'd love to hear some real world stories from you, kind of about how control, trust, and influence have impacted Blackwolf's clients. So if you wouldn't mind, please share with us a time when you found yourself in conflict or in a room of conflict and that resulted in transformation within a Blackwolf client.
I want to share that, and you certainly have been a witness to this, that the relationship between, I'm going to call it personal and professional, and the importance of dissolving that separation within ourselves, separating the personal and, there is such a thing as personal and professional. And, I can remember, at the very beginning of my career being taught that, that you needed to separate the two. And it never felt right. And so the stand that I think is inclusive, the inclusive stand to take is to treat your personal relationships exactly the same as you're treating your professional relationships, from an empowerment place. I do want to, I know that I'm not answering your question specifically, Gabriel, and ask it again, but I do want to make the point that transformation is the conscious shift from a causality-based mind or belief system. And what I mean by causality is the belief that someone or something else is causing me to think, feel, or behave this way. So that's a causality-based belief system, and that's the belief system that I think has, kind of created a victim mentality or an entitlement mentality. And I think the shift to is the self-authoring. The shift to an empowering belief system is understanding that I am the author, or I am choosing how I respond to other people, situations, individuals, at the personal level or at the professional level, and that's consistent. So I just wanted to, it's been rattling around in my mind, Gabriel, and I wanted to make sure that was.
And no, very helpful. And also just to bring you back to the question and to frame it within the point you just made, tell us about a time when you were working with a Blackwolf client and you saw conflict really open the door to them embracing the opportunity of shifting from a team causality mindset to a team self-authoring mindset.
It's great because so a story pops right into my mind, and one didn't pop into my mind, and that's why I shared what I just shared. There was an individual, a senior leader, in another country, from another country. So it was really kind of an amalgam of many different scenarios. But his intent was to help his colleagues. And he was in a role where that was possible. But he was using sarcasm as a way of doing that. And so sarcasm is, and we had this conversation. So I had this one-off conversation with this leader. And I said, I asked him, I said, talk to me about sarcasm. What's your perspective about what the value of sarcasm is? So he literally talked around it and then couldn't talk about what the value of it was, other than, what his intent was. And so what I shared with him was your intent having the impact that you intended. And he was like, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way before. So that's really kind of my point, is really understanding what is the intended impact, and then what's the impact that you're actually having. And so what he moved himself into seeing in his mind's eye was how sarcasm was really pushing people away, which is what sarcasm does. That's what sarcasm is intended to do. It's intended to push people away. It's not about acknowledging them or supporting them. And I said to him, and he was open to this, I asked him, I said, are you open to this? He said, sure. I said, what if you were to acknowledge people from your position and invite them into communicating, like really talking to you from their hearts, and literally say that, tell me how you feel, in your heart about X, Y, Z. So that a real dialogue began, a real conversation began. I really want to be clear to the audience. It took a couple of months for this individual to really chew on this idea of sarcasm as is not a contribution. He rang me up. I can still kind of see myself in the car. I was coming back from the airport, and he said, Robert, I know I haven't talked to you in a couple of months. He said, I've been thinking about the last thing that you said to me about sarcasm isn't a contribution. And I think I now understand what you meant. So I knew that he was rigorous by the strength of how sarcastic he was. And if he were to shift from being sarcastic to being a contribution, and to really inviting people into this space of authentic and caring communication, things would shift. And they did, and they have.
That's great. So I think the same, this authentic caring communication piece now more than ever is really needed. You know, in this era, this new era of the coronavirus outbreak, pandemic, business leaders are facing many conflicts. You know, we're in a virtual work environment every day. Are the people that work with us doing as much work as I am? Are my expectations clear? There's a lack of, you know, being able to pick up on social cues because we're not, as you would say in the past, breathing the same air, which takes on a different kind of connotation now. But you know, you're still working every day with senior leaders around the world in this current time. How have you seen leaders create a transformative experience through their authentic and caring communication, especially during this time?
You know, and I would say to you, it's always a choice, whether you're with people or you're not with people. So it's in the pandemic, COVID virus scenario there's a lot of social distancing. It's evolved into safe distancing. There was quarantining. To your point, it is a choice to connect, and connecting to other begins with connecting to yourself. So that, and this goes back to the leadership and self-deception. So I have to ask from others what it is that I know that I'm willing to do. I'm willing to be vulnerable. I'm willing to love. I'm willing to contribute. And what I found, and you know, and we know that I, you know, have this great benefit of, you know, privilege of having talked to people all over the world. So I've had to use the telephone or the new video technology, and not be in person with people. I am absolutely 100% certain that you can create relationship and really communicate authentically with people and not be in the same space as them physically. And so I don't think that it really changes much, Gabriel. I think that the same self-empowerment and empowering others that you do in the same space, you just carry that over into whether it's the telephone space or it's the video conferencing space or et cetera. I think that it starts with the self, and the same things that you need to do to really empower yourself and to really be in empowering self-talk doesn't mean that you're always in it, but that the more that you're in it, the more that you're aware that when you're not. I want to say that again. The more that you're in self-empowerment, the more you become aware when you're not in self-empowerment. And awareness is really the foundation of it all. And so inviting someone else into the space, I haven't seen a no. People just don't say no when they're invited into a space of love and contribution and self-empowerment.
Yeah, I love that answer. I think that if anything, this pandemic has at least provided us with the opportunity to explore deepening our vulnerability with each other. I think I keep going back to this example that I keep witnessing of the simple question of a colleague asking another colleague, "How are you doing?" is taking on a tremendously different connotation now than it did 2 months ago. And the acceptability of that person answering in a authentic way. I'm having a really hard day. I'm homeschooling my children. My husband just lost work. My wife is having to balance the professional career and night classes, and it's opening the door to a whole new way of experiencing each other. And again, back to your point of dissolving the personal and professional boundaries that we have with each other, this time is really creating the opportunity to do just that. And we're talking to each other from our home offices. We have the privilege of having home offices, but lots of folks there, if they're working, live in a big city, or young professional, their home office might be their bedroom, and now the office has become your home. So I think there's a lot there. There's a great question I want to pull into this one. It's from Susan. She mentions a thought leader, Shad Helmstetter. He claims that programming creates beliefs. He also claims that in order to reprogram requires techniques that an individual must perform and repeat. Right? So the discipline of new practice or ritual. How do you invite an open conversation if that person does not want to change their beliefs? Simply, the other person refuses to open his or her mind.
The first thing I would say is, Shad, and I don't know this gentleman.
Well, but the question's from Susan, our dear friend Susan Rosengrant, but she, I think, is referencing kind of an academic in that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, where I was going with that, Susan, was the importance of heart. And programming is not a heart-centered emotion. It's a head-centered emotion. It's like figuring it out. So I think that it's really quite difficult to figure it out. I think that the heart is a fascinating, and the science of heart-centered emotion and heart-centered consciousness is accelerating in this time. Fundamentally, do I agree with Shad? Yes, I do think that transformation requires reprogramming. I would never ever call it reprogramming. I would call it, self-awareness. I would call it an understanding of how I'm empowering myself or disempowering myself. I would really kind of make the choices of understanding that choice is really at the foundation. I am the chooser to be empowering or disempowering. And I think that the reprogramming also is, I talked about this earlier, is a form of mantra repetition. And mantra just is a conscious, empowering phrase. And I think that I may get argument from some aesthetics that have been choosing mantra phrases that are more spiritual. I do that myself, but I don't think that that's solely what mantra repetition is. Mantra is really an empowering thought or phrase. A lot of times just starts with I am, and then an empowering thought. I am able to love. I am able to be loved. It requires a lot of vulnerability. I know it's I really would ask the audience to just even, take within themselves, this thought that I am able to love and I am able to be loved. And what that does to your heart is it immediately starts to soften your heart. I would even share with you that when it begins, tears are likely in that experience. And I think in a lot of ways, it's important to give yourself what it is that you never got from outside. And a lot of times we kind of say we didn't get it from our parents, or we didn't get it from this situation or that situation. First, you have to give it to yourself. And if you give it to yourself, it's amazing in my experience how the people that you always wanted it from start to give it to you. And it's about understanding that, and I'll share kind of it personally, when it was shared with me, when my father shared with me that he did his best, it really transformed. I was ready to hear that he did his best, and that he did what was done to him. He said that as well, and that transformed our relationship. Just being the space of whatever it is that he wanted to share was enough. It was enough. Sometimes that doesn't happen. I really am grateful that it happened. But whether it happened or it didn't, it really would have had an impact on me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Susan followed up by saying the gentleman Shad wrote the book titled "What to Say When You Talk to Yourself." So I would say you're tracking impeccably. That the mantra and I am pieces are right on with where Shad's heading with it. So, we've talked a lot about conflict and I would say, conflict is the shadow side. The light side is resonance. What can you share about, just in the last few minutes we have, and please, with anybody else that wants to ask questions, we more than welcome to do our best to take them. But what can you share about how a leader can shift from being in conflict to being in resonance with another when their views are opposing?
Well, if someone's in dissonance, I don't want to be in resonance with their dissonance, and I think that conflict is a dissonant state. So I would say, how do I attract someone into a state of resonance, moving out of right-wrong conflict and into care? And it opens up the question I see that was asked by a participant about moving out of right-wrong. How do we build trust? And I think that trust, I think Feltman's work around trust, and the Thin Book of Trust is the name of his book. I think the two internal qualities are sincerity and care. There you go. Thank you. Are sincerity and care, and the two external qualities or communication qualities are reliability and competence. So when you put those four qualities together, you're actually building trust within yourself, towards yourself, with others towards you. And I see that the natural evolution into being able to deal effectively with conflicted individuals or conflicts is going to come from those four elements of trust. I will say that Blackwolf added a fifth element. This one takes a little bit, but it really is about understanding that forgiveness is a self-awareness process, and being self-aware that it's important to let go what someone else tried to give you. So again, you can read about that definition of forgiveness from Carolyn Myss, is the author, M-Y-S-S, no syllables, M-Y-S-S, Carolyn Myss, and forgiveness. If you Google that, she'll talk more deeply about that kind of forgiveness.
Yeah, that's great. I think we probably have time for one more question, and it's a real juicy one, so I may have to end the answer shortly. But kind of aside from the "I'm right, you're wrong" dichotomy, this person's asking the question. Aside from that dichotomy, I see distrust, or the lack of trust, as a major source of conflict. What trust building practices do you suggest in terms of navigating conflict?
I mean, other than what I just said? Yeah. So I mean, that's my perspective, is that really, I think that trusting others starts with trusting yourself. And that's where I think Feltman's work really becomes critical, along with Blackwolf's understanding of forgiveness.
Mm.
So I think doing all those, and I think that, the reliability and the competence is really do an inventory of, can I be relied on? And I think Feltman does an outstanding job of really keeping it simple but profound.
Mm-hmm.
So, am I reliable? Do I do what I say I'm going to do? And am I competent? And I think those 4 plus forgiveness qualities are really about how do we build trust in a way that is going to have an impact on ourselves and our relationship with other human beings, and the planet, actually.
Yeah, thank you.
That in there, yeah.
Well, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much. Thanks for everybody that joined. It was a great conversation. I think we brought it back full circle. We've recorded the discussion, and we'll share it to all of you in the next coming days. We would love to keep the dialogue going. And so if you want to ask questions via social media, please use the hashtags trust versus control. That's, hashtag trust vs control, and hashtag Blackwolf on social media to connect with our Blackwolf team and with each other. Have a great day, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and stay healthy out there. We're sending love. Bye-bye.